All right. Well, we'll go ahead and skip through a few of the introductory slides. Eliza, you've been with us before, correct?
Yes.
So you know what we're up to and who we are and all of that good stuff.
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. So I'm just going to skip right on over to our objectives. I think if you want to
Sure.
take it away.
So we always like to have learning objectives for our monthly sharing calls just to kind of guide our conversation. And so I know that we've talked all summer on review standard number 10 from the 2017 DSMES National Standards, which is the quality improvement standard. And so the theme, because of the provider satisfaction survey, that could meet your requirement for standard 10 or whatever information that you get from your providers could also inform a continuous quality improvement plan or project. So we'll just review that again. We'll also just kind of, again, go back to what a Plan, Do, Study, Act is, because Meredith had just overlaid that PDSA with the provider satisfaction survey. And then kind of relook at the provider satisfaction survey and just, that's an example of a provider outcome quality measure, or whatever information you learn, you can also create outcome measures from that as well.
And Eliza, I'm sorry, I failed to allow you to introduce yourself for the benefit of Kelly, who is also on the line with us from the Boulder DSMES program.
Yeah, hi. I am Eliza. I work at a integrated health clinic in the southwest part of the state.
Perfect. And you guys, are you AADE or ADA?
We're ADA.
All right. Thank you.
So just to review standard 10 again, this is one of the requirements is that you have a quality coordinator that will measure the impact and effectiveness of the DSMES services and identify areas for improvement by conducting a systematic evaluation process and outcome data. And so once you identify a project or plan, this is one example of a process that you can use. A PDSA cycle is a straightforward and iterative approach to a quality improvement in your practice. And so you break it up into 4 parts, and it's cyclical. And so you first identify your plans, you develop the initiative. And then once you do that, you do the do portion, which is implement your plan. And then as you are doing your plan, you're collecting data and you're checking the results. So that's the study part. And then the last part is from those results, you identify another project or you continue that same project by acting on it, making further improvements. So it's a vicious cycle, and it can be in all aspects of your work. And so I will send a link, I'll add a link into the chat box for a module that I found online that was really helpful, guiding you through this PDSA cycle.
If we look at what we've been up to in June, July, and August and how that overlays with the PDSA, basically in June and July, we developed questions for the provider satisfaction survey. In July, we reviewed the draft, so kind of in that planning phase. In August, we talked about options for if you choose to use the provider satisfaction survey, how you would go about disseminating that and some ideas that you all had on getting better return rates. and had conversation about just how you would get that out to the providers. And then this month, accordingly, we'll talk a little bit more about the study and act phase of that PDSA cycle using the provider satisfaction survey as an example. Obviously, that's just one option. There are so many different topics and areas that you could choose to do a PDSA on for your CQI. So we're just using this to sit within that PDSA as an example.
We always like to engage our participants in the call and just gather information on the topic of the call. So today's question is, what part of the CQI process is the most challenging for your DSMES program? Identifying an area for improvement, determining timelines and important milestones, collecting, analyzing, and presenting the results, getting support and buy-in from staff, understanding the difference between outcome and process measures, or not applicable, we don't have a program yet. So on your right-hand side, the poll will open up. You have 30 seconds. Select one of the options and then be sure to click submit, and then the poll will close.
And while we're waiting for those results to come in, do we have anyone on the phone only that's not on via WebEx that would like to share your feedback on that question? All right.
Just be in a few seconds for the results to come up. This morning's call, everyone thinks almost every answer, every option was checked, and so it was across the board. Okay, so for our call, so this call, we had 2 people selected identifying areas for improvement, and then 1 person getting support and buy-in from staff. Great. So hopefully we'll cover the identifying an area for improvement with a facilitated conversation, how you can get an idea. And then getting support and buy-in from staff, we'll definitely, if we have time, we'll go over some thoughts or suggestions that others can provide, or we'll hold that thought and try and incorporate that into future calls as well, because in order to do a CQI project well, you really do need everyone on the team on board.
So if you've been with us in June, July, and August, this visual will look very familiar. Just like to keep this front and center. A provider satisfaction survey is an example of an outcome quality measure. So those provider satisfaction results can really help you identify areas of improvement, maybe to increase referrals to your program, or to identify the best way to communicate with the providers on the patients that they're referring to you. So for a facilitated portion of the call, we're going to review the segments of the final provider satisfaction survey and just do some hypothesizing and discussion around potential responses that providers could send back, and accordingly what you would do with those responses. So for this example, a quality improvement goal may be that you would seek to be getting strongly agree responses from the providers in all of the areas of the provider satisfaction survey, which would indicate that you're realizing both provider outcomes and program outcomes. So any survey response, basically from neutral or below, neutral, disagree, strongly agree, then are going to be those areas that you can really key into to see what improvements might be possible.
So Just a quick update on the provider satisfaction survey. Over the 3 months, we came with a final draft, and then we just needed to work on ownership, on how to add ownership to the survey, as well as here at CDPHE, I just needed to send it through communications to make sure it met communication standards, and it did. So it is all set to be sent out to everyone. So Meredith and I will come together and figure out the best way how to disseminate the information to you all, as well as how you can disseminate the information to your providers. So I broke up the facilitated conversation in the 3 different areas of the survey. And so the first one being the effect of DSMES on the overall quality of care I give to my patients. And so using the study and the ACT part of the PDSA, you look at the results. And so for our purposes, I want you to think about what if your responses were neutral or below, so neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. And so, for example, if a provider, so number 4 said improved overall ability to self-manage diabetes, and they said disagree, I want you to think about being open-minded of what would you do to further act upon that? How would you dig deeper into finding out, well, why isn't it improving that individual or individual's overall ability to manage their diabetes? As an example, or if there's another one you want to speak to on the list. The group this morning talked about A1C as an example for clinical quality outcomes.
This is Barb Johnson from ABRMC in Mahenta.
Hi, Barb.
Hi. So one of the things I'm seeing down here is right now I'm just not getting a lot of referrals, and I missed your meeting last month. I'm very sorry. I don't even know if it's something you can put on there, but what I want to say to the providers is, why don't you send them to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to use this questionnaire, but how do you do that without offending somebody?
How do you do that with what? I'm sorry.
Without offending the doctors. It's like, why don't you think this is a needed service for your patients?
So Barb, there is, I'm not sure if you were on yet when Inga was talking about our distribution plan for the survey. It's near final, so we'll be getting that out. But there is a place on the bottom of the survey that asks exactly that. If you are not currently referring patients to our program, how can we facilitate that process, or what resources do you need? I forget exactly how it's worded, but there is an opportunity for that.
Thank you. That's my big question for most of them in my area.
And they may not be aware that if they're sending your patients to you, that it can improve all of these things. And so maybe to spin it, changing, for you it may be a little bit different with the survey. It's more of how do you market yourself that by going to getting diabetes education by a diabetes educator, then it can improve clinical quality outcomes, improve behavior change outcomes. And so maybe your PDSA could be something more specific on your program, and you can show those results to providers.
And I have the last 2 years in diabetes month in November, and I don't mean to get off the track here for you. I'm sorry, I felt like it applied, because I have people who are going to answer neutral. with your original question, but I have sent out information showing them that the national standard in A1C reduction, I believe, is 0.67. And we have greater than 1. We've had as much as a 1.25% A1C reduction from people going to diabetes education here. So it's like,
Right.
when, I don't understand them.
Right.
So,
Well, we're definitely happy to continue the conversation offline with you, Barbara, if you need some more ideas of how to engage providers. We do have that technical assistance opportunity with Marianne Hodorowicz. Remember, she was our speaker in April. And so if you want to set up with Meredith an opportunity to speak with her and see, kind of diving deeper in. And so you may not even be at this point of doing a provider satisfaction survey because you're not getting the referrals from providers. So taking even a further step back. And so maybe it'll be more specific to something within your program that you can do a quality improvement to show your providers. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Well, and Barbara, just calling out the fact that you're aware of the national average on A1C improvement and what your specific A1C improvements are, perfect example of measuring your data to be able to communicate and act on or not act on the information. In your instance, fortunately, you're above the average. So a great example of how that information in itself is telling you, you know what, we really don't maybe need to focus on improving A1Cs for a CQI project. We're going to focus on something else. So I love the fact that you mentioned that measurement.
And so I think, the PDSA is when I was preparing for this call, it's kind of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. It's just constantly, what is affecting one thing or the other. And so for me, one of the objectives of this call was to first kind of understand the difference between an outcome measure and a process measure, because that can get pretty complicated. So, improves clinical quality outcomes if a participant goes to a diabetes education class. And then the information that you get in a diabetes education class, is that coming from a evidence-based curriculum? So it's just always looking at each part because there's always a cause and effect. And so for me, a process measure, for example, would be the example that I found was like percent of patients with diabetes who have a current A1C documented. But the outcome measure would be percent of patients who have an A1C less than 7, for example. And so what process you have a process to get the information, so an EHR registry, but then the outcome is like percent of patients who have an A1C less than 7. I don't know if I made that more complicated, but what are some projects that you all have going on now? Eliza, what have you done in the past?
This is Barb Johnson again.
Hi, Barb.
Sorry, I feel like I'm hogging the phone time. Everybody else is bashful. Right now, we are monitoring how many are getting their annual eye exam. That's my new one. Last year, it was the monofilament exam.
Okay.
We have also done how to get referrals, so I'm getting ready to reactivate that one because I'm not getting a lot of referrals right now.
So with your eye exam one, what's that process?
So at their initial evaluation, I find out if they've had an eye exam within the last year.
Okay.
And then I try to facilitate referring them to someone who can meet their particular needs. For instance, I had a woman who came in and she said, I won't go in and have a dilated eye exam because it gives me migraines. And so I educated her about the process of diabetes in the eye and what the damage can be done and that it's important to do it. And I talked to her about the new photo imaging that they can do. There's a few providers out here in this rural area that have it, not many. The dilated eye exam is still the gold standard, but so I called around to find out who in our area has that service, and I gave her that information. And so that's one person. But then, I give them the names of all the providers in the area, and we set a goal typically for them to get an appointment to get in and be seen within 3 months if they haven't seen a physician within a year of their initial appointment.
Mm-hmm.
And Barbara, how are you measuring and tracking that? Is that just a matter of like an Excel spreadsheet that you had to set up, or what's your measurement mechanism?
Yes, I use an Excel spreadsheet, but I also use AADE7 and I document stuff in there. And then because the way my accreditation is, I'm supposed to be making quarterly phone calls, follow-up phone calls to patients to it's just the way I set it up for the program, so that I call them and check on their goals and check on, making sure that things are up to date. So if they haven't had a monofilament exam, I tell them it's time for you to do that. And if they're not getting exercise, we troubleshoot on what they can do. So on the quarterly phone calls that I make is when I get follow-up on whether or not they met the goal. Is that? Was that totally confusing?
Excellent. No, that's great information. Just find in our work that a lot of times that measurement and demonstration of how you're improving or what you're improving is oftentimes challenging. So the intent is there and the documentation on an individual patient basis is there, but as far as aggregating those results and saying, on a year's timeline, we went from 5 patients having individual eye exam follow-up to 25. That seems to be where more of the challenge that I've seen and heard of has come in. So that's great that you're tracking it to the extent that you are.
My
Thank you for sharing.
Are, of course, a lot smaller out here because I'm rural, but I do total them up quarterly, and I send that information out to my advisory group stakeholders, and update them on what's happening and ask for input back on suggestions. So that it's not so hard at the end
Excellent.
of the year. Excellent. Quarterly.
You're the gold standard.
It's a great example. Thank you, Barb.
Uh-huh.
So we have 1 minute left. We weren't able to go through the rest of the slides, but it's just even when you get the results of the survey, is to really just think about, how many responses you're getting and strongly agree, and then those that fall under, that's where you can make the opportunity to find another PDSA project or plan. And then you can just narrow it down, hone in on more specific stuff to continually improve your program. So our next call is going to be October 17th, which is always the 3rd Wednesday of the month, either at 8:30 or noon. And so for this call, we're going to facilitate a conversation on potential topics for the Spring 2019 Diabetes Conference. So we had hosted CDPHE Intelligent here at the Health Department a conference last spring, and it was very successful, and we got a lot of great feedback that it was worthwhile having an opportunity to actually go and attend a conference in person related to the work that we're doing. And so we have plans to do that again this year. So I want to get idea of potential topics because I really want the conference to meet your needs of what you need to be successful in your program. And so We also gave a quick update on the provider satisfaction survey that's finalized, so that we'll send that out to you in the next few weeks. And then,
Great, thank you.
yep, so just wrapping it up, here are some related resources, and then finally on the right-hand side, poll will populate, and so please take a few minutes to complete the short survey. It'll pop up on the right hand of your screen. So before you X out, please complete that, because this is the only way the feedback that you provide us only improves these calls every month. So I don't know if WebEx, if we could get the survey question up. And you know how to reach us.
Thank you all for joining this afternoon.